Welcome to AI for Healthcare. Today we'll look into how Siamese network can be used for SDTM classification. It is based on a fairly recent paper by Eric, Laura, and Sushila. Let's start with what is a Siamese network and what is SDTM. Siamese network consists of two identical neural networks with shared weights. Each network takes one of the two input samples and extracts feature embeddings. The final output indicates how similar or different the inputs are. For example, if we provide same picture as input for both networks, it should be a match. If we provide slightly different pictures of same cat, it should still produce a match, meaning very similar embeddings. If we provide two inputs of different animal, then it should not be a match, meaning the embeddings should be very different from each other. Another way to look at this is Siamese network produce embeddings in such a way that similar inputs are clustered together in the multidimensional embedding space. At the same time, different inputs are pulled further apart from each other during training of these networks in multidimensional embedding space. Now let's understand what is SDTM. If someone is trying to run a clinical trial, a lot of patient data is collected through data entry forms. These forms are called as ECRFs, electronic case report forms. There are multiple ECRFs in a given clinical trial. A form could be associated with demographics data. Another form could be associated with adverse reactions. Another form could be collecting medical history, and so on. Each of these forms would have multiple data entry fields within them. For example, demographics form can have age, sex, race, ethnicity, birth date, and so on. Multiple stakeholders running clinical trials will code these variables in various ways, meaning a significant variation exists the way these variables are named in these ECRFs. Let's understand this with an example. Assume there is a very big pharma company, Company A. Company A also has a subsidiary company called Company B. And recently, Company A has acquired another company called as Company C. Now, it is very likely when these companies are trying to run clinical trials, there would be a lot of heterogeneity or variations in terms of how these fields are coded on ECRFs. For example, adverse event start date or vital signs, heart rate could be coded with multiple variations. This creates a significant problem if someone wants to have aggregated look at this data. The only way to aggregate this data and run any meaningful analysis on top of it is to have a standardized version of it. Meaning the variables listed in the white color should be mapped to variables listed in the orange color. The way one would map these variables is using SDTM. SDTM stands for Study Data Tabulation Model. It is a standard model which is used as a reference to convert these variations into a standard format. Now let's look into how the Siamese networks are used to classify or to map these variations into standard format. These researchers have considered 4 key data elements associated with fields in ECRFs or these forms. These 4 elements are field ID, referred as field OID, pretext, posttext, and form ID, referred as form OID. Let's understand this with an example. In a given form, there are 3 fields. Each field has a pretext like age, weight, or trial start date. Some fields can have posttext, which describes additional details in terms of how data should be captured in the respective fields. Each field would also have a unique system ID called as form OID in this case. All these fields would be present in a given form, and that form would also have an ID called as form OID. Now let's see how this information is used. In the first step, all elements associated with a given field are concatenated. For example, the second field on the form would be concatenated as shown here. Then a dictionary is created where each word is mapped to a given number. It is done using a library like GenSim, and the reason why a pre-existing dictionary is not used is because a lot of terms, a lot of tokens in this particular task are very unique, and it is less likely that some publicly available dictionary knows these words. As we have seen, Siamese network needs pairs of input. Positive pairs are used to train a model to identify similarity, and same way negative pairs, the pairs from different classes, are used to train the model to identify the differences. They have maintained 1:20 ratio for positive and negative classes. And finally, a stratified holdout dataset is created. Now let's talk about the actual model. It is done in 3 different phases. Let's go through each. This is the Siamese network they have used. It looks very similar to the one we have seen earlier. At the end of the network, some sort of distance metric is used. They have used a simple Euclidean distance, which is enough for this purpose. At the end of pipeline, a final activation function is required to determine if the given input is similar or not, meaning there are 2 classes, which is why they have chosen a sigmoid function. They have used a custom embedding model, reason being a model like BERT would not be aware of all the terminology and unique tokens this task contains. And finally, they have chosen the dimension size of 20 for the embeddings, meaning at the end of each network, 20 numbers would be produced to represent the given input. In the next phase, they have used embedding network trained in phase 1 as input for a traditional ML model. As you can see, KNN, K nearest neighbor model, is used, which works very well with the numbers which are basically embeddings in our case. Then we go to the inference phase. A text vector, which is basically the concatenated string of pretext, fieldoid, posttext, is used as input at the inference stage. And using both these models trained in phase 1 and phase 2, that is the embedding network and K nearest neighbor model, we predict a class. A class here is basically a standardized variable name, which is from SDTM. To give you an example, an input which consists of pretext HR, fieldoid vs underscore HR, and posttext in BPM is concatenated and used as input to the model. The model will produce the standardized variable name from SDTM, in this case VS heart rate, vital signs heart rate. That's the SDTM mapper in a nutshell. These are the results, and as you can see, the model significantly outperforms all the other methods listed here. Alright, so let's try to understand why they might have used some of the methods listed here. The core of this entire approach hinges on 2 key techniques. One is the Siamese network, which produces the embeddings for the given input. Let's try to understand this with some sort of analogy. Imagine you have 1000 marbles. Each marble can have one of the 100 colors. So basically you have to group marbles in a group of 10 so the similar colored marbles can be together. That is the problem we are dealing with. There are hundreds of fields in a given clinical trial. There are dozens of forms. Each form can have dozens of fields. That basically leads to hundreds of fields being part of a clinical trial. And we have to sort them in such a way that we can assign them to appropriate classes. There are various classifiers you can use, but as you can see intuitively, Siamese network makes sense as they can create embeddings which have done half of the work, and then we can use a simple classifier like k nearest neighbor which can use those embeddings and fairly quickly produce the output, which is essentially a class giving us standardized SDTM variable name. Next thing is they have used distance in couple of places here. The first instance is at the end of Siamese network training pipeline, and the second instance is while using k nearest neighbors. In both these cases, it makes sense to use Euclidean distance as a simple, commonly used distance metric. The final activation function at the end of Siamese network is sigmoid. As we have seen, it is a binary output case, and sigmoid gives us exactly that. Again, they have used custom embedding model, not something like BERT, and the reason is this problem statement contains a fairly unique terminology which is not available publicly, and it is highly unlikely that BERT is aware of this terminology. So while trying to create embeddings on a fairly unknown terminology, it is better to start from a custom model and train it from the scratch rather than trying to fine-tune existing model which is not aware of these tokens. And finally, we have seen the embedding dimension, which is 20. That sums up this paper. Hope you like this video. Feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you.